Week 11 is upon us, so we're going to be breaking down a couple trade targets for you guys to go after. We're getting close to fantasy football trade deadlines. Mine and my home league is actually this week. Let me know down below. Let us know in the comments when your trade deadline is. We'll be sure to keep note of that and talk about some league winners that you can go after to help take down your fantasy championship. A lot of these trade targets we're talking about in this video are going to be geared to those of you guys that are, 6-3 or better, because I'm sure those are the people that are watching this content actively. They're trying to take down their championship. Those of you guys that are, 2-8 or something, you might need to pack it in for this season and focus on next year. But we are trying to get people to the fantasy playoffs, trying to make sure that people can win fantasy championships. So I'm fired up. I'm ready to get into this. We're not going to waste any time. Let's hit the intro. All right, so we're going to be going through 2 buys and 1 sell each. A lot of these guys are going to be focused on, back half of the season, what they can give you during the fantasy playoffs and potentially get you to the fantasy playoffs if you're on the fringe right now. Danny, who is your first buy? I'll let you kick things off.
Yeah, my first buy, which may come as a shock to some given the jerseys behind me, DeAndre Swift, running back of the Philadelphia Eagles. And the reason why I'm all over on buying DeAndre Swift is that his peripherals are awesome. He's a clear lead back on a top 5 offense in football with an upcoming stretch with high implied game totals. The Eagles' schedule coming up is going to be monstrous. They're going to be playing the Cowboys. They're going to be playing the Chiefs. They're going to be playing the Bills. They're going to be playing in some high-profile games, and that offense is going to need to put up points to be able to compete. I understand his points have been volatile at times this year. Like if you've had DeAndre Swift, you see some games where he's scoring 8 points, some games where he's scoring 18 points. He's been a little bit volatile on a week-to-week basis, but I do think that the projection moving forward could be even rosier. He's a guy who's top 10 in the NFL with 9 inside the 5 carries. He's gotten very unlucky, though. Those 9 inside the 5 carries have only resulted in 2 touchdowns, a couple where he got stopped on the 1-yard line, some tush pushes in. That'll happen if you have DeAndre Swift, so you can't expect, full touchdown equity in this offense because of the tush push play. But the fact that he has 9 inside the 5 carries and only 2 touchdowns, positive regression is coming because he has been efficient everywhere else on the field. It comes down to just finishing off his runs in the area. Like if he scores 2 or 3 more touchdowns in that stretch, we could be looking at the RB5 in fantasy right now. He's still scoring roughly 15 PPR points per game. And now you got an offense that is going to project for 28 plus points per game down the stretch. It's going to be efficient. It's going to get a lot of inside the 5 carries. I wouldn't be shocked if he was a mid-range running back 1 rest away.
Yeah, it's funny too, because you look at the Philadelphia Eagles schedule. You talked about a lot of potentially high scoring games. They have the Chiefs this week, the Bills next week, the 49ers the week after, the Cowboys the week after that. And then, so some of those defenses are pretty strong, right? And you'd be a little bit worried about that from DeAndre Swift's perspective. But during the fantasy playoffs, he has the Seahawks, he has the Giants, and the Cardinals, which could be potential good game script running performances for DeAndre Swift. And if you guys are buying a guy like DeAndre Swift right now, you're buying him for that stretch run. You're probably 6-3 or better. You're trying to win your fantasy championship. So yeah, I'm a little worried about Swift because he is still like the same guy that never finishes an NFL season. But I think the Eagles are doing a really good job of preserving him, not overloading him with 75, 80% of the snaps like the Detroit Lions did at times. And that resulted in him getting injured and resulted in him missing a lot of the fantasy playoffs. In 2020, in 2021, when he was a very good fantasy asset, he just didn't get to the finish line basically because he got injured. So I'm not usually an advocate to buy a guy like DeAndre Swift, but I do think like other than the fact that he could get injured down the stretch, which is true of any running back, he is a really, really good option because like you said, the Eagles are going to be in high scoring games. They're going to have opportunities to score points, and DeAndre Swift is going to be a beneficiary of that, even if he doesn't get every ounce of the high value touches in the red zone. It's funny you mentioned 9 inside the 5 carries and only 2 touchdowns. Your boy Tony Pollard, also the exact same stat line inside the 5-yard line as well. So these NFC East running backs, for whatever reason, they're just getting unlucky in the red zone.
Yeah, no, it's insane right now. And again, like we see Jalen Hurts with all his rushing touchdowns this year. And if you've had DeAndre Swift, you're probably thinking back, well, the 3 or 4 times where DeAndre Swift was stopped at the 1, like what could his fantasy season realistically be looking like right now? Could he be in Travis Etienne territory? Could he be in Austin Eckler territory? Right now, his valuation is more so a low-end running back 1, high-end running back 2. When maybe, things fall differently, that would be his valuation.
Yeah, and like when I look at my top 10 like rest of season running back rankings, Swift is at 10, so he's behind a lot of these guys. But when I think about like the safety element of DeAndre Swift, like I think he's a safer projection week over week than even Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall. I think he's a safer projection week over week than a guy like Josh Jacobs. Like with those offenses, there's volatility, right? Like there's going to be games where the Jets and the Raiders score like 7 points or 13 points or something like that. It's a far cry to say that the Philadelphia Eagles are going to score less than 20 points a game, let alone not going to be in the 28 to 35 point range like we've seen from them this season. So yeah, DeAndre Swift, a good buy. If you need to, sell high on like a Kenneth Walker, a David Montgomery, maybe Joe Mixon, somebody like that, and sell them 1-for-1 for DeAndre Swift because, somebody's worried about him getting injured down the stretch, I think that's a great move.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you.
Okay, so moving on to my first buy of the video, we got Cooper Kupp, wide receiver of the Los Angeles Rams. Cooper Kupp has kind of just been a victim of circumstance recently. Matthew Stafford is expected to be back in week 11. So that's obviously the biggest piece of news with Cooper Kupp. And even with Matthew Stafford back, they now have Carson Wentz as their backup, which is a little bit better of an option than what you had with Brett Rippon there. I'm not sure we're ever going to get 2021 or 2022, even Cooper Kupp back. So I'm not saying he has that type of upside, but I do think he's a legit top 6 to 8 option rest of the season, given the target share he commands, given how good he is in the red zone usage that he gets. And he has the Commanders, Saints, and Giants in the fantasy football playoffs. So Seattle this week as well. So the reason I think you should buy him now is because he's facing a defense that's 26th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Last time we saw Cooper Kupp before the bye, it was, Brett Rippon. Everybody probably has a sour taste in their mouth with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua for what it's worth. We shouldn't really think any differently about Cooper Kupp at this point in time than we did back in week 7 and week 8 when he was back on the field having, 37% target share in week 5, 47% target share in week 6. He has great usage, and people are going to downgrade him just inherently a little bit in their mind. When you look at, the receptions per route run leaders across the league, it's like Cooper Kupp up there with the names of Tyreek Hill and St. Brown, and he's higher than Stephon Diggs and Keenan Allen and Devontae Adams and some of the other great wide receivers around the league. So for me with Cooper Kupp, he's still going to be expensive. You're getting a 90% discount, though, on Cooper Kupp. Maybe you could trade a Joe Mixon, a Kenneth Walker, a David Montgomery. Maybe you could package together a trade like this where you're giving up, Christian Kirk and TJ Hawkinson for a guy like Cooper Kupp if you have better tight end options on your bench or something like that. So there's moves that you can make. It's going to cost you something, but I do think we're talking about a potential league-winning wide receiver during the fantasy football playoffs.
Yeah, and I think you can add, like you kind of mentioned, his teammate Puka Nacua to this list as well. I don't think people realize just how much of a fantasy goldmine Matthew Stafford really is. Like, obviously, that narrative has been thrown around, but when this guy is on the field and healthy, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp literally command 70 to 75% of the work of this offense. Like, the concentration of this Rams passing attack with Matthew Stafford is honestly unprecedented. Like, we know Cooper Kupp is going to get his 10 to 12 targets per game. We know Puka Nacua, maybe not at that level, but he's going to get 8 to 11 targets per game. Where the football is getting distributed for Matthew Stafford. You mentioned the schedule. You mentioned that he's going to be more healthy now coming off that bye week, 2 weeks fully removed, 3 weeks fully removed actually from that thumb injury he suffered against the Cowboys. I'm buying in as well.
Yeah, and Kyron Williams will probably be back soon too, which helps the offense as well.
Yep.
So I can double up on my other buy, and then we'll swing back to you because I do think that the other buy that I have, which is Breece Hall, running back of the New York Jets, is another like kind of just buying 90 cents on the dollar type of guy. He's going to be expensive. You're not going to get him for nothing, but the usage with Breece Hall is outstanding. And you combine that with his actual ability, which we know he has the ability to take anything 75 yards to the house. We know he can make people miss. We know he's getting all the targets. He's getting all the goal line work. He can really sun run the rest of the season. And the Jets are barely converting 20% of their red zone opportunities. And we know that's probably not going to be like best in the league. They have Zach Wilson as their quarterback. He's objectively a bottom 5 QB in the NFL. But thankfully, the schedule is favorable down the stretch, the back half of the season for the Jets. They have the Bills, Dolphins, Falcons, Texans, the Dolphins again, the Commanders, and the Browns. Other than Cleveland, those are exploitable defenses. And they're games where the Bills, the Dolphins again, the Falcons, the Texans, and the Commanders are going to put up points. All those offenses are capable of scoring. And the Jets have the 3rd most favorable running back rest of season schedule in the NFL. And we now have Breece Hall fully healthy. He's like over a year removed from the ACL tear. The Jets just cut Michael Carter, which may mean an increase in Breece Hall's 2-minute drill work and his long down and distance work, because on the season so far, he's only getting about 20 to 30% of those snaps. And the fact that Michael Carter is now gone could open up that work. And especially if they're playing from behind against the Dolphins twice and the Bills and stuff like that, you need Breece Hall to get that type of work because it could mean more receiving production for him. So for me, I mean, like I have him as my RB6 rest of the season. I think he's a very, very good option. I think you can sell high potentially on a guy like Keenan Allen, get Breece Hall plus another great wide receiver. You could sell Jalen Waddle and get Breece Hall. Maybe you can get up from a David Montgomery or Rashad White or somebody like that and add in a wide receiver on your bench to get up to a guy like Breece Hall and anchor your starting lineup with a legitimate top 6 running back rest of the season.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, this is just with the projection that they are probably a bottom 3 to 5 offense in the league that I think he's a buy. We're also having, some type of implied factor. I don't know how realistic it is, but I mean, there's still the factor that what if Rodgers is true to his word and actually comes back and this offense suddenly sun runs, like he said, in the fantasy playoff time? Again, I would probably place a likelihood realistically at like a 10 to 15% chance. But like we were kind of talking about, even if this offense projects to be bad, Breece Hall's been uncharacteristically inefficient these last few games. I'm going to trust the player that I saw before he tore his ACL last year. We saw really getting up to speed this year prior to these last few weeks. I don't think these last few weeks in terms of his efficiency are indicative of the type of player we're dealing with. I still think this is an uber talent. The offense has kind of struggled, like you said, especially in the red zone area, and he's getting a monstrous workload. So like you kind of said, mid-range RB1 that you could potentially get for high in RB2 prices because he's been struggling.
Yeah, and it's pretty funny that the Jets are just like such a predictable offense right now. If the running matchup is good, then they're going to be a functional offense and Breece Hall is going to eat. If they're playing a team that's really strong against the run because they don't really have a quarterback, then the team and the offense is going to struggle. So knowing that they have a good schedule is quite important for Breece Hall and the Jets because they can't really do anything else other than feed number 20.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. Fully on the page of Breece Hall. Again, mid-range running back one for both of us rest of the season. Let's get into my second buy, though, and it does me no favors having to add this guy to the buy list. It feels gross to even say this name as a buy, considering he was literally one of my busts entering the year. But I do think people are really sleeping on James Conner right now. And again, feels gross to even say that, but he's being largely devalued based off the time he missed this season. When James Conner was healthy and fully ready to go throughout the season when he was playing, this was a legitimate running back too. This was a guy that was averaging 12.42 PPR points per game in games he's played over 50% of the snaps and 13.7 PPR points per game prior to the injury he suffered. Now you're getting Kyler Murray in it for the long haul. I really expect this offense to see an uptick, have a higher ceiling than what they had even with Josh Dobbs at this point this year. Part of the risk with drafting Conner was always his injury risk that he would represent. Well, guess what? He had his injury. He's back now. This offense projects to be potentially even a top 15 offense. I wouldn't be shocked if James Conner rest of the season could be a top 12 level running back. Sounds a little bit gutty to say that, but the workload is there. The receiving work is there. And Kyler Murray being there now adds a lot more scoring element to James Conner's potential production.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes fantasy football isn't about like the most talented player getting the, huge workload. Like sometimes the guy is just, well set up to do well at the end of the season. And James Conner absolutely is one of those guys. I will tell you an outrageous truth about my rest of season rankings. I have James Conner over both Tony Pollard and Saquon Barkley in my rest of season rankings right now.
I don't think it's crazy. Realistically, Joe Mixon is sexy James Conner, and James Conner is ugly Joe Mixon.
Yeah, and like the schedule also, like what you didn't really mention because I talked about this yesterday in the rest of season rankings, risers and fallers. Top 3 quarterback schedule, top 3 wide receiver schedule, top 7 running back schedule. Every position group has a potential to really sun run at the end of the season. The Cardinals, they play the 49ers in week 15, which is like a relatively tough matchup. Then they play the Bears and the Eagles. And that game, even though the Eagles are strong against the run, could be very high scoring if Kyler Murray is playing at a high level. So with James Conner, I mean, like the guy's efficient. He's been really efficient. He's one of the highest graded running backs on PFF this year, even though he's older, even though it wasn't a good offense. It was a new coaching staff. They're probably starting to find their legs on offense. They had a rookie left tackle. There was so much going wrong for James Conner and the Cardinals that now things are kind of all falling into place. You had a rookie wide receiver as your number 2. You have a quarterback coming off an ACL tear. Everything is kind of aligning for all of these Cardinals to really sun run for the rest of the year.
And with all that, like I said, with all of the struggles from an environment standpoint from the offense, he was putting up nearly 14 PPR points per game. If this offense gets to, like we were mentioning, top 15, potentially even top 10 levels, given the basis of that schedule he has coming, if Kyler Murray looks like his old self, which, I mean, we saw it on that game-winning drive. Guy scrambles, gets a first down, kick the game-winning field goal. Cardinals win that game, go up to 2-8. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if the Cardinals aren't this, dumpster fire team by the end of there. They're like a 6-11 team. They got hot in the end of the year. And James Conner, like we kind of mentioned, a ton of touchdown opportunity moving forward.
Yeah, and this is coming with no bias. I have 1% James Conner in Best Ball Mania 4. So this isn't me like confirming my portfolio or anything. Like this could really screw me. Thankfully, I have a lot of Kyler Murray and Marquise Brown, but James Conner's sun running at the end of the year is something I don't personally want to happen because I don't really have a whole lot of exposure to the guy. But I do agree with you that it is probably a pretty likely scenario now that he has some fresh legs and a decent situation around his belt. So moving on to another similarly older running back that I believe is a sell. So we're getting into the sells of this video here. I have David Montgomery as a sell, and me and Danny have kind of gone back and forth the last couple of videos on, David Montgomery versus Jahmyr Gibbs. How's the split going to look? I was very adamant that, Danny was being outrageous, thinking that Jahmyr Gibbs was just going to work in as the number one running back, and Dan Campbell's going to do Dan Campbell things and still play David Montgomery 70% of the snaps. And David Montgomery's not going anywhere. He's not going to be a useless fantasy asset, but I thought he would be an RB1 for the rest of the year and probably a top 10 running back for the rest of the year. I'm more so in the camp that he's probably a mid RB2 for the rest of the year. He's going to have his touchdowns. Anytime they get in the red zone, they're probably going to look his way. But we did see a pretty large shift in their backfield usage. Now, I want to see it again because David Montgomery was coming off of an injury, but Jahmyr Gibbs out-snapping him. That's the first time that's happened all season. Jahmyr Gibbs getting most of the goal line work. That's the first time that that's happened all season. And Dave Montgomery, if it wasn't for a 75-yard touchdown, probably has a bit of a dud type of performance on 35% of the snaps. So while you have that boosted touchdown in people's minds, David Montgomery is the RB8 in points per game this season because he has been relatively good when he's been on the field. Why not sell high on a guy that you can get potentially an elite asset for? You could probably sell David Montgomery for Bijan Robinson in some leagues. You could probably get Breece Hall in some leagues. You could probably get Javonte Williams plus or Josh Jacobs potentially for David Montgomery. So for me, I think this is the perfect window where you're getting a guy that is a good running back. He's my RB14 rest of the season. I think he's a solid guy. I just think you can get a better option if you sell high on him now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree here. And for the record, it's so funny because like you kind of said, people are off that high with David Montgomery. How many times is David Montgomery going to rush for a 75-yard touchdown in a game? Like, it's for real. It's hilarious to me because it's almost like a Freaky Friday situation where Jahmyr Gibbs swapped with David Montgomery and David Montgomery swapped with Jahmyr Gibbs before the game. Because if you were to describe the scenario where one Lions running back rips off a 75-yard touchdown and the other scores 2 touchdowns inside the 5, 99.9% of people would have had the roles reversed. So it is funny. If Dave Montgomery's not getting that inside the 5 work moving forward, not only does that mean Jahmyr Gibbs is a top 5 running back rest of the season, that has Dave Montgomery more so in the top 15 range, potentially rather than the top 10 range that we thought of him even 2 weeks ago. With David Montgomery, it's very similar to that of a Mark Ingram situation, which we saw with the 27 Saints, for example, where Mark Ingram at the beginning of the year was treated like the starting running back. But as we saw the year go along, Alvin Kamara became the superstar we knew him to be come 2019, come 2020. Alvin Kamara developed in that superstar throughout the season. I think Jahmyr Gibbs, rest away, is going to be the Alvin Kamara of this backfield.
Ironically, same coaching staff as well.
Yep.
So definitely some connections you can make there. And David Montgomery's value right now is RB14 in my rankings. It could go lower than that. Like if we see another week where he's like 38% of the snaps or something like that, and Jahmyr Gibbs is eating into his goal line role, like suddenly we're talking about a guy like I have my over Isaiah Pacheco, Joe Mixon, Kenneth Walker, Rashad White. Like he would be below those guys if he has another week where he's, moving down in terms of the pecking order, but he was coming off a multi-week injury. So I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt that it might correct itself out to more of like a 55-45 split in terms of their overall snaps. But regardless, Jahmyr Gibbs is the guy I want in this backfield. And that's why David Montgomery is a sell. So moving on to your sell, we've actually kind of mentioned his name a couple times throughout this video, but Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants, I already dirt napped him prior to this week, but now I think it might be a little bit more challenging to sell him, which is why I think he was actually a better sell last week.
Yeah, and with Saquon Barkley, it's no doubt that he's a talented player, and this may not even be a sell high, but I am selling before the ship goes south. He's now in an environment playing for a Giants offense that will be implied for sub 15 points every single time Tommy DeVito is his starting quarterback. Tyrod Taylor is not coming back till at least week 14. If you're doing the math there, fantasy football playoffs start week 14. If you're in a spot right now where you have to go and clinch your playoff spot, Saquon Barkley is probably a high-end running back 3. given this offensive situation of the Giants. Don't get me wrong, the workload is still elite. This is still a very good player, but defenses are absolutely teeing off on Saquon Barkley, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. He is the lone bright spot on arguably the worst offense in the entire NFL. He's still a big-time player. He's been a fantasy league winner in the past, and I do think that you can get a pretty sizable package for him. Again, especially if you're in a more casual league. The name Saquon Barkley, people think about that 2018 year. People think about this guy legitimately being a top 5 running back in the past. I think, like we're kind of mentioning, can you get James Conner plus for Saquon Barkley on the market right now? Because I think you can easily do that, and you might even be able to get a wide receiver 3 back on that.
Yeah, I think you could even shoot way higher than James Conner. I think you should be able to get a guy
Package
like,
up.
Potentially
Breece?
Devon A-Chain if you're going after like an upside piece. Maybe Javonte Williams you can get up to. Maybe you could go after Isaiah Pacheco even. Like I would rather have him than Saquon Barkley, to be honest. Because I mean, not only is Saquon not in a good situation with Tommy DeVito, he hasn't had his bye week yet either. He still has that in week 13. He also, during the fantasy playoffs, plays, what are his teams here? We got the New Orleans Saints in week 15, which, again, every week of the playoffs, you got to win to make the next round. And if you're going against the New Orleans Saints, the third best run defense in the league against fantasy running backs. Then he has the Philadelphia Eagles, the second best run defense in the league against fantasy running backs. And then if you even make it to week 17, he has the Los Angeles Rams, who are more of a pass funnel defense anyway, and they're still a relatively strong defense to begin with. And, of course, they're going to be implied for 12 points in all of these games. Like it's going to be low over-unders, not a lot of points scored. And this is assuming you even have Tyrod Taylor, which is no guarantee. Like they might just shut him down for the season, especially, I mean, after that New England game in week 12, like they might be in position to pick first 2 in the entire draft.
Like there's a real possibility that they're 2-11 entering their bye week. What, week 4? No, sorry. 2-11 by the time Tyrod Taylor comes back. If they're 2-11, especially if they lose that Pats game, ownership may step in. Ownership may say, hey, listen, like we're in a position right now to get Drake May. We're in a position right now to get Caleb Williams. I'm not going to say like they're going to outright tank, but we don't think that Tyrod Taylor, oh no, he's going to come back a week later than expected, a week later than he was initially.
That's not even including if Saquon himself gets hurt too, because he might get shut down as well.
Especially with the workload that he should see on top of the fact that the focus that he's going to be getting from defense is like, I watched that game against the Cowboys. I'll tell you right now, that defense was not scared about Tommy DeVito throwing the ball across the yard on them. They were stacking the box, and they were making sure Saquon Barkley didn't move the ball. The only time he even got yards, keep in mind, in his first 7 carries, when the game was like sort of within striking distance, he had 1 rushing yard. He ended up finishing with 13 for 66. A lot of it came once the Cowboys were up 35-7, 42-7 in that game. If we get even more slightly competitive game environments, like you don't expect this guy to be a 3 yards per carry, 2.5 yards per carry back?
Yeah, and I mean, some of these trades with Saquon, it's like Saquon and DJ Moore for St. Brown, for Keenan Allen, for CeeDee Lamb. You can use Saquon and Brian Robinson right now, who just had a big game, to get up to Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, if you can actually get a legit difference-making asset for a guy who, even despite his name value, and if he was on a different, like if you dropped Saquon on the Cowboys offense right now, we're talking completely different stories, probably top 5 running back in fantasy.
Yeah.
But this offense is so bad. He's not playing well enough to the point that he can elevate it. And defenses, like you said, they're literally going to stop 26. That's all they need to do to win by 3 touchdowns against this team. Yeah. So, Saquon, not a guy that I really want to hold on to rest of the season. I don't anticipate him being a league winner of any stretch of the imagination. So if you can sell him for a great player based on name value and, maybe throw in a wide receiver from your bench or whatever to get up to a better running back, I would highly suggest you do so, because next week the bottom could fall out and everybody might be viewing him as an RB3 as opposed to like he's been close to RB3 range now for like 2 weeks. Ever since Daniel Jones tore his ACL, I dirt napped him all the way down to the back end RB2 range. So definitely see what you can get for Saquon. That is the end of this video. Hopefully you guys got some value from it. Leave a like, subscribe, comment down below any of your thoughts. Also let us know, with the stretch run coming in the fantasy football playoffs in the end of the season, what do you guys want to see? Do you want to see more trade targets? Do you want to see, dynasty stuff? Do you want to see 2024 prospects? Whatever you guys want to see, we will definitely take in all of that feedback and probably make videos based on what you suggest. So the better your suggestions, the more specific they are, we'll probably actually implement them. So leave them down below. If you want access to our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto, which took a big time update, might do like a risers and fallers or a trade targets before trade deadlines of those as well. definitely check out the link down below in the pinned comment. That will get you access to all of those rankings, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, trade value charts, 2024 prospects, all that good stuff, bucketed rankings, top 200s for super flex, one quarterback leagues, tight end premium, whatever you guys plan, we got you covered in the Dynasty Rankings Manifesto. That's also available on flockfantasy.com, promo code FSE for 30% off. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.